I want to welcome you to the December 23rd episode of Laid Back History's 2024 Advent Calendar, brought to you by the National Road Heritage Corridor. Let's see what we're talking about today. So after we did the episode on the predecessor of the Pony Express that ran on the National Road, we had some questions about how was mail carried after that failed attempt at a Pony Express. And so I invited Tom Milholland back to talk a little more about it and give us some more details.
When we talk about the wagoners and stagecoach operators that worked along the National Road, one particular group is an area that we can study more deeply, and that is U.S. mail carriers. So one of those U.S. mail carriers that we know something about was a man by the name of Richard Miles Brimmer. And Brimmer was a stagecoach operator that in the 1840s lived in the area around Richmond, Virginia. Eventually, in the later 1840s, we believe that he relocated up around the Washington, D.C. area and eventually began operating his stagecoach operations northwest of Washington, D.C. up into Maryland, and also in areas heading up toward Baltimore and even southern Maryland. By the late 1850s, we believe that he was operating in the National Road in southwestern Pennsylvania, including work between Uniontown and Washington, PA. So how that worked is that Brimmer, in addition to operating a conventional stagecoach line, applied for U.S. government contracts to haul the United States mail. In the early days of the National Road, the mail was relayed for a time using a Pony Express method like you may be familiar with that carried mail out west in the early days. As the National Road became more of a business artery carrying all kinds of commerce westward, we see the letting of U.S. mail contracts to stagecoach operators like Brimmer. So by the time of the late 1850s and early 1860s, Brimmer operated a U.S. mail operation between Uniontown and Washington. And it's believed that he had, and his various drivers had residences in both Uniontown and Washington, so they could make a run end to end from Uniontown to Washington, and they did this day after day after day. And Richard Brimmer eventually had another delivery line that went from Washington, PA to Pittsburgh. So from the late 1860s onward, Richard Brimmer expanded westward with his stagecoach operations and his U.S. mail carriage. And ultimately, he was conducting his operations as far west as Claremont County, Ohio, which is in the vicinity of Cincinnati. So that's a very brief summary of an example of how U.S. mail was carried along the National Road.
I want to thank Tom for coming in and talking to us and telling us a little bit more about how the mail was carried on the National Road. I really appreciate him taking the time to do that. Well, I guess I will see you tomorrow for an all-new episode of Laid Back History's 2024 Advent Calendar.